Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Sermon, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we will be looking at different life cycles. And we're going to explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not about the money itself, but rather about the emotions that are associated with your finances. That's generally how your decisions are driven. Although we may be fairly general in our discussion, we'd love to hear from you. So please make it more relevant and personal by reaching out. You can call in. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post your comments and your questions on Facebook, on YouTube, or anywhere else that you might be listening. So how often have you heard somebody say, "What was I thinking when I decided that?" Or, "I wish I had not agreed to fill in the blank," right? You may have even said it yourself. Decision making is part of our everyday life. We do it all the time. Often we're not even aware that we have made a decision, and sometimes they seem incredibly easy. What am I going to have for breakfast? You know? Other times, those same decisions seem absolutely daunting. Some of our decisions are inconsequential. Really doesn't matter if you don't have a great cup of coffee, right? But others can change the trajectory of our lives. It is that much harder to make a decision when we are in a stressful situation. Our guest today is going to guide us on how to make decisions we will not regret. Karen Covy is a divorce attorney and a certified divorce coach. She is a tremendous resource, and I got to tell you, I absolutely love that she has experience and training in multiple disciplines around divorce that are focused on helping people go through divorce, because many people are drawn on being a divorce coach, are not trained in being a divorce coach. But we have somebody here who has a tremendous amount of experience and wonderful training to help you get through this. And I do recommend, if it resonates, please do pick up the phone, call Karen. We'll give you her information. Karen, it's wonderful to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
It is wonderful to be back. I always enjoy our conversations.
I appreciate that. It's always good. And as we had pre-show conversation, always stimulating, always great, always informative as well. So we're going to get straight to the show, because there is a lot to cover. Making decisions, not just going through a divorce, is an important skill set to have. And, some people seem to have a knack. Other people can learn how to do it better. So before we do that, though, I am going to ask that you share a little bit about your background. I spoke about your training and your experience a little bit. Where does the passion come from?
That's an interesting question. Right now I am a divorce coach. That is mostly the work that I do, but I'm also a recovering divorce lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, and collaborative divorce professional. So I've helped people go through divorce every way that there is to do it. And I think my passion comes from, I didn't start working in divorce right out of law school. I first worked for a big Chicago law firm. I was a trial lawyer. Then I went to government and ran a 100-lawyer bureau. And then I started my own practice. And I said, I will take any kind of case there is except divorce. And here we are. But I think because of that background, when I went into the divorce system, it didn't make any sense to me. I mean, the way it's one thing to have somebody on the witness stand and have your lawyer rip their face off when you're talking about, there's some company that manufactured a product that killed thousands of people or what have you. But when it's your spouse or your soon-to-be ex-spouse, and you have to go sit next to that person at your kid's soccer game the next night, that makes no sense at all. So I became passionate about helping people do it better, because I know there's a better way to do it.
I agree. I agree 100%. I love that. And that definitely drives passion. That definitely does. Jumping straight in, obviously we're both divorce professionals. Our focus is that helping people through a unhappy and often, not always, contentious, but always, I think, stressful situation. So looking at that, what keeps people stuck in an unhappy marriage, and why do people struggle over the decision of whether to stay or whether to go?
I think obviously the reasons people get stuck are as individual as the people who are going through a divorce or thinking about it. But if you can group the reasons, one of the main reasons is fear of the unknown. I mean, divorce changes everything. It changes your every area of your life. And there's no guarantees how it's going to turn out. So people are afraid to move forward because they don't know what's going to happen. So that's probably one of the main things that keeps people stuck. The other thing is what I call a values conflict, right? So
Right.
people walk down the aisle and they said, I'm going to be married till death do I part. And now they're miserable, but they're still alive and their spouse is still alive. So what to do?
Right.
So you have that inner conflict of, I said I was going to stay forever, but I also want to be happy at some point while I'm still on this planet. And it doesn't look like I can have both of those things.
Right. And,
So people need to
so go
resolve
ahead.
that.
And throw in a couple kids, and that decision becomes that much more difficult, right? I think,
Absolutely.
I guess the first decision is to actually decide whether you're unhappy, and the next one really is, uh, can I change that? Can we as a couple change that? But I think that's going to be a different show, because we could spend the rest of the show on those two questions alone, I think. So that's your topic for next time, just warning you.
Okay,
But
no problem. Got it.
how long how long does it take for the average person to decide whether or not to get a divorce?
I can't quote you statistics because they're obviously hard to get. People don't go into studies saying, yeah, I've been miserable this long, right? But I can tell you that the time period is generally measured in years, not in weeks
Wow.
or months. And some people, I was working with someone a few years ago pre COVID, and she had been married 30 years. And I said to her, how long have you been unhappy? And she said, 28.
Wow.
But there had never been there'd always been a good reason to not do the hard thing. And that's the interesting part, because your brain will always come up with a reason not to do the hard thing. So
Right.
for a while it was, oh, we're just married, I've got to give this a chance, and oh, then we have kids, and then I have another kid, and then there's something wrong with the business, or the economy, or the blah 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 blah, and there was never a good time to actually make a hard decision. And it wasn't until she got to the point in her life where she was looking at less time in front of her than what had been behind her that she was saying, I need to do something.
Right. And I think, we spoke about this before the show. Sometimes you lose who you are or what your priorities are sometimes, because you trying to save a marriage, you're putting your kids before yourself, whatever it might be. So that definitely plays in. So is this like a buildup of, I'm not so happy, to, I'm not sure I want to be in this relationship, to, now it's unbearable, I have to get out? So kind of, if I can call it a linear progression, or
Mhm.
are people kind of going back and forth? Oh, it's not as bad. Oh, we had a great weekend. Maybe there's hope. Oh no, I got to, how does that work a little bit?
Well, the answer to your question is yes and yes.
I thought so.
It's both, because the first time you have an argument or a disagreement or a disappointment in your marriage, most people are not ready to throw in the towel on the first disagreement, right?
Right.
So it is that buildup. It's like, this isn't what I want. Something's not right. I don't feel good. It's not working for me. So it is that buildup to get to a point, but it also is the, okay, I can do this. Yes, I can. It's not so bad. And then you wake up the next day and you look at your spouse and you're like, what was I thinking? I got to get out of here. And then they do something nice or something not so bad. Or you're like, oh, I can live with this. I look at my kids. Maybe it's not so. And so it is that back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
So it's about, it's hard to make a decision, because some days you're like, oh, it's not so bad. And the other days you're like, oh, yes, it is. So,
And part of the reason I bring that up, by the way, is I actually, anyone listening, by the way, should know, if they're going through that and asking themselves, what's wrong with me? Why can't I think this through? Why can't I make a decision? Well, nothing's wrong with you, right? It's common. That's number one. I actually, just to solidify that point, I have a client. We touched on this a little before the show, but I have a client right now that I'm working with her, and I said, well, how long have you been thinking about this? And she said to me, this is the third time I'm contemplating getting divorced. She had done it probably about 8 years ago, the first time. They got back, they had a kid actually, they got back together in a good fashion. And again, this is the third time. But again, it's I think it's rarely, quite honestly, linear unless something drastic kind of happens. There's always that hope of who the person was, things like that play in. So
Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, you don't want to live your life that way. You don't want to live your life on the fence, one day saying, okay, I'm done, and the next day saying, yeah, no, I'm not, and then yes, I am, and then no, I'm not. Because what the worst place to be is in indecision. If you've made a decision, then you can move forward. But when you don't make a decision, you're stuck and you're not committing 100% to your marriage. And you're not committing 100% to creating a life out, after your marriage. You're just stuck in the middle and you're not really living your life. And that's part of the reason that I'm so passionate about helping people make this decision. Because honestly, to me, I'll tell you a secret, Hirsch. I am the biggest hopeless romantic on the planet. I believe in love. I believe in marriage. But that's also why I believe in divorce, because when you're stuck in a miserable situation with no hope of ever changing it, you're not going to have the love that you're really looking for. So, when I'm coaching people, I don't have any skin in the game in terms of trying to force them into marriage or force them into divorce. I'm just trying to help them make a decision that they're comfortable with, because ultimately it's their life, it's not mine.
and I think if you break it down, every person wants to be the best person they can be. I would venture to say being in this limbo and this indecisiveness, and as you said, kind of part of your focus being out of the marriage and moving forward, part of your focus being how do I save this marriage and how do we get that back, you're just not going to be the right and the best person you can be. So having that decision, and whether it's staying and making it work, or whether it's this is the end, we got to move forward, you can move forward in both ways, but you're going to be able to move forward in a better fashion, be a better person in that respect, if you are able to make that decision.
Exactly. And sometimes the decision may be, okay, I know I'm going to leave, but I can't, for whatever reason, now is not the right time. I have to wait until, maybe somebody's sick or you've got a financial situation resolved. That's okay. But even having made the decision in your own mind, you can start taking steps to move you in that direction, even if you're not, pulling the trigger right away.
I'm glad you said that. Planning is huge on my agenda when I speak with people, and getting educated, understanding your options, knowing what you want, your priorities. These are all things that it's much better to do on your timeline than the pressure of having to make a decision because I'm at mediation and this came out. So I agree 100% with what you're saying, and I think that leads actually into my next question, or I've got many more questions, but my next one really related to this is, are there common mistakes that people make when they making these decisions?
Absolutely. And they're they're the usual suspects, so to speak, right? Everybody goes into divorce going, I don't want to make an emotional decision. What people don't realize, and brain science, neuroscience has shown, is that all decisions are emotional. We make the decision emotionally, then we justify it rationally after the fact. Because the scientists have done studies on people who have brain injuries and they have no emotion. And what they found is if you don't have emotion, you can't decide what to eat for breakfast. You can't, decide what to wear that day. You can't make even the simplest decisions. So they're all emotional. But there's a difference between having an emotional component of a decision and working with your emotions, or having your emotions run the show and take over. And that's when you make bad decisions. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is allowing themselves to be ruled by their emotions of either guilt. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done this. And so I'm going to give my spouse whatever they want. Or the emotion of fear. If I don't give in, then, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me? Or the emotion, I don't know if it's actually an emotion, but exhaustion. because divorce is a marathon, not a sprint. And people get to the end and they just want to be done, and they've been fighting for so long and they're trying to negotiate, and there's all these details. And that's when people make the biggest mistakes, because they're just like, screw it, I'm done, just do whatever. And they give away the farm because they don't have the stamina and the mental fortitude to just to stay the course and say, no, these are the things that matter to me. Yeah, I'll give in on the other stuff, but the things that really matter, I'm not just going to give away. And if I do give something away that matters, I'm getting something in return for it.
I love what you're saying, because one of the things that I do with clients is I have a session just on their priorities, and not just their financial priorities. A lot of things, it may be a priority that needs financial backing, but it's not only your financial that I look at with them. And I think it's so important, because what you just said, if I understand what are my 3, 4, 5 real priorities coming out of this, everything else is what you use to get it. I can give everything else up. But if you're not aware of what it is, you may be deciding on things that aren't so important to you, and you're giving up sometimes the things that are, especially if it's stressful, especially if you've been bullied, all the rest that comes with that. I think practice is a big thing. I'd venture to say, I have not read the science that you have, but I would venture to say, when you are unhappy with the decision that you make, think about that. Why was I unhappy? What made me unhappy? And now the next time when you have to make a decision, and sometimes the next time is under a lot more stress, you've kind of got a mental thought process already around making a decision. But if you've never been able to do that before the stressful situation, it's not all of a sudden going to click. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another tip too that I have. There's something a lot of people don't know about it, but it's called decision fatigue. Because, all right, I've got a question for you now, just for fun.
Just to put
How
me on the
many,
spot.
yeah, how many decisions does the average adult make in a day?
I gotta believe it's hundreds, if not over 1,000. I don't know the number, but it's got to be way more than people realize.
According to Inc. magazine, 35,000
Wow.
per day. That's the world we live in. We've got information coming at us all the time. You're deciding from the trivial things. I mean, obviously it's not all big decisions, but we're making that many decisions. So by the end of the day, you're flipping exhausted, right? That, we've all done that. You open the refrigerator and you do the death stare.
Yeah.
Because you can't decide what to eat because you've had such a hard day, right? So part of the key to making good decisions is to know when you're tired, to know when you can't make a good decision and defer that to the next day. And if you are going to do something like go into a mediation or a negotiation where you're going to have to make decisions, what you want to do is front load as many decisions as you can from the night before. So for example, you lay out your clothes, you decide what you're going to have for breakfast, you make everything ready, you get rid of a lot of those smaller decisions that aren't important, so that you save your mental energy for the ones that are. Does that make sense?
That it makes total sense. And it's interesting, because everyone, when you talk about exhaustion, I think everyone by default goes to physical exhaustion. But at the end of the day, there are times, I know I've experienced this, where I just need a mental break. I want to tune out. And I think that's part of that fatigue you're talking about. Is it can come in, they say our brain is a muscle, right? And it can come emotionally, it can come physically, it can come in various ways, and we're not always aware of that. So I think being able to save up, if I can say, store up those decision-making power and the energy around that, it makes total sense to me that you should clear the clutter as much as you can before you have to make the important decisions.
Absolutely. And to your point, though, practicing decision making before you get to the point where you have to make the big ones is also important. I mean, if you have been used to in your marriage letting your spouse just make all of the big decisions or all the financial decisions or all the whatever, there's going to be a bigger amount of fear around your making those decisions for a change, right? So you've got to start doing it and start small. baby steps. People think, oh, but that's so small. It's, this decision's so little, it doesn't count. No, 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 no. They all count. You've got to start, making those small ones so that you build up to where you're confident making a bigger decision.
The analogy that I think about when people talk about these baby steps and are they really important? Usain Bolt, his very first step was a little step. He now runs, the 100 meters in however few seconds. I can't even say however many, it's how few, right? It takes one small step to move in that direction. And I think that becomes very empowering. I've worked with clients who never had a voice in the marriage. And when they're going to the negotiation, whether it's mediation, whatever it is, one of the last things I will say to them before I'm done with preparing them is, growl at me. I want to hear you get your voice, because people, I literally have made some of the sweetest, kindest, most shy people growl at me. Sounds crazy, I know. But there is something to having it in you beforehand and moving it forward. And I think it really does start to empower you tremendously. The more you do it, the more you realize you can. And I'm bringing that up because we have to take a break. And I think that's where we're going to go when we come back from the break, is a little bit of how do we improve, how do we empower, and then ultimately get into how do we do it with confidence and all the rest. So we'll be right back. Karen, before we go, they've flashed it on the screen, but can you share with people how they can get in touch with you to learn more about what you do and how you can help them?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is KarenCovy.com. There is no E in Covey, or I'd be related to somebody really famous, and I wouldn't have to do this for a living. So it's KarenCovy.com, or they can email me, Karen@KarenCovy.com, or call.
Great, I appreciate it. We will be right back in about 2 minutes. Stay tuned. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. I'm Hirsch Sermon, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. And our guest today is Karen Covy. We are speaking about how to make decisions you won't regret, which making decisions is an important skill set. Making them in a way that you don't regret them and they empower you, which we were touching on a little bit before, is so important. Before we continue with some questions and getting the Karen insights that we've been getting, which have been amazing, I do want to recap some of that because we have covered a lot of things, and I think some are definitely worthy of repeating, which is so important. We did speak about what keeps people in an unhappy marriage and why they struggle with the decision and those inner conflicts that people have. And I think sometimes those inner conflicts and the frustration of not being able to make a decision bears badly on them emotionally because now they think something's wrong with them, but it's very natural. So hopefully anyone listening who's struggling with that understands that pretty much everyone going through divorce, anyone making those kind of decisions does make it does take time internally for them to work through that. How long do people stay and contemplate? I was pretty shocked when you said it was years. You actually gave an example of somebody who had been married for 30 years, had been unhappy for 28, and it shows how this decision can weigh on people for 28 years, being able to decide. And I thought the trigger, if I can call it that, or the catalyst was she realized she had more years behind her than in front of her, realizing this is not the life that I want to live. This is not the best me I can be, which I thought was pretty fascinating in itself. We spoke a lot about, and we're going to get more into making decisions, improving on how to make decisions, reviewing the decisions and practicing ahead of time. So when the big decisions come up, that it is important that you've worked through and thought through them and understand when you make decisions, what you like about your decisions, what maybe you weren't happy with your decisions, and how you can think about changing the way that you do that. Because as we spoke about, it is more than just I got the knack on how to make a decision. You really can think it through. You really can weigh in. And as you pointed out, the science shows that a lot of it, to all of it, is the emotions that drive somebody, that ultimately help them make a decision or drive them to a decision. And being able to, I guess, temper when you're highly emotional and just use some of those emotions, I think becomes a very big part of that, if I'm understanding that correctly. So
Beautiful. Beautiful summary.
thank you. I appreciate that. I've been listening, not just taking notes, but I have been listening and learning. And I'm going to share this. It's a little embarrassing, but we were speaking. I mean, weeks ago we spoke about what should we call the show, what should the topic be, and when I was coming up with a name, I couldn't decide. Right, I wanted it to be just right. So I love the idea of making big decisions is an important skill set everybody needs, but the idea of not having regret, and I think that's a big holdback for people, is what if I regret this? And so leading into my next question, which is a big one, how can you make a decision that's as big as whether to get divorced with confidence?
Doing that requires you to be sure inside of yourself that you've done everything that you could do to make it work, and it's not going to work, and it's not the life that you want. So there's a couple components to that. First of all, you have to decide what you want. And that seems pretty obvious. It's like, oh, of course I know what I want, until you try to actually articulate it, right? And then what most people will tell, if I say to someone, what do you want? Most people will start by telling me what they don't want. And that's fine. It's good to know what you don't want, but that still doesn't tell me, what do you want? And then you get to something like, we say, well, what do you want? And then the answer becomes, I want to be happy. Well, that's beautiful, but what does that mean, right? Happiness is this big amorphous concept, and what makes some people happy makes other people miserable. So what do you mean? Exactly. You've got to be specific and, be able to clearly identify what you want. And then when you know that, you can, look at what you have and say, is this what I want? Is there any way that it can become what I want? Can I change what I want to want what I have? You look at all those questions, but when you're clear in yourself This is not what I want. It's not working. It's not working for me. It's not working for my spouse. There is nothing that I can do to change it. We've tried all, the things, we've done marriage counseling, we've done retreats, we've, talked to each other. We've tried our best and it's not working. At some point, then you say, if this can never be what I want, maybe I need to move on. And then you're good with the decision. Then you're confident that you did the right thing because you're not leaving any stone unturned.
Right. And I'm sure you've heard this several times. Why didn't I do this earlier? That's
More
been a
times
big
than I
one.
can count.
But I think the guidance that you've just given is so solid. Is really, you do want to be able to say there wasn't a stone I didn't turn over, and work on and try to figure this out. Because when you make a decision and you haven't done that, there's always that little bit of, well, what if I'd done that?
Mm-hmm.
Chances are it may not have helped because you tried 99 other things, but it's that one item out of the 100 that may not give you the confidence to move it on. So being able to do everything within your ability and look at it, and as you said, really be able to define what do you want is a huge one. I work with people and they apologize to me sometimes saying, I should know this. And the truth is, should you? You've now been married and changed who you were for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You lose a lot of who you are. And what you really need to do is learn who you are again, as opposed to, I should already know this, because you've often lost it, a lot of who you are. You also, I think the big piece also that people kind of forget about is they think, oh, this used to give me so much joy. It doesn't anymore. Why? Well, we as people, we evolve, we grow, we mature, we learn new things that we get more joy out of. And so all of these are pieces, I think, that play into this becoming confident with your decisions and being comfortable with your decisions.
And you can't confidently make a decision if you are constantly beating yourself up. There is no benefit to saying, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. All you're doing is making yourself feel bad. You can't make a good decision from a place of feeling bad. So that's the first step that some people need to take, is to stop. As I say to people, stop shooting all over yourself. Okay. Just appreciate that you're where you're at. You're doing your best and you're learning. That's it.
Right. Very true. Now, I know you've got some tools that are going to help people. And I'm going to ask you to share, should I say, some of those tools to help people in how do they decide whether getting a divorce is really the right thing for them.
So you're asking me to share my secrets, huh?
I'm going to ask you to tease the audience with
That's
them.
okay.
I mean, the truth is, I think people should be calling you if they are in this situation of trying to contemplate, and what should I do? And we talked about emotions, and emotions are biases in many
Right.
ways, and you do need somebody who's knowledgeable, who's experienced, and objective, and that I think encompasses you tremendously. So I do encourage people to call you. I'm going to ask you to share some of the secrets, maybe.
Okay.
How is that?
Let me just start by saying that I think, people say they don't want to make that emotional decision. But what they need to remember is that our bodies are a huge source of help when we're making any kind of a decision. So a good decision is going to be a little bit of head, a little bit of heart, and a little bit of gut. So you've got to use all three. So let's talk about the heart and the gut. How do you listen to what's going on? And it starts by you getting quiet and just noticing if you were going to make this decision A, does your gut clench? Does your jaw tighten? Does your heart start racing in a bad way? Or does it start jumping with joy? Does it make you happy? Does making, a decision make you feel good or feel bad? So you don't have to get all woo-woo about this, although there's nothing wrong with woo-woo. But, pay attention to how you feel, your head, your heart and your gut. But you got to also get your head in the game. And to do that, you need a framework. And the framework I used was actually developed by two university professors, Chip and Dan Heath. And they developed a process called the WRAP process, WRAP, which of course everything stands for something, right? But in applying their process, which was developed for business and political and big, huge decisions in all kinds of organizations, applying that to human beings in more personal decision making, I find that I needed to tweak it a little bit. So I use a process called IRAPA. And the I in IRAPA stands for gathering information. That's step one. You can't make a decision unless you know what's involved. So your first step is going to be to gather all the information that you need to gather about making this decision, good, bad, and indifferent, so that you have the knowledge you need. The W is to widen your options. If you only have one choice, it isn't a choice. It's it's no choice at all. If you only have two choices, it's an ultimatum. It's not until you have at least three possibilities that you can widen, you've widened your options enough to actually make a choice. So that third step is to widen your options. And people think, well, it's either I stay married or I get divorced. No, there's a lot in between there. You can stay married and work on your marriage. You can stay married and not work on your marriage. You can have an open marriage. You can have, there's a lot of different things you can do. So that second step is to widen your options. And the third step is the R, it's reality test the options that you've come up with. Because just because you've come up with options doesn't mean they're good ones. Doesn't mean that they're actually going to work for you and for your spouse. So that's the R. Then you've got A, which means to attain some distance, to try to get objectivity, because, we all know you can't see the forest for the trees when you're in the thick of something. So you sort of pull yourself away a little bit and say, how can I be objective? And is what I'm thinking right, accurate, objectively true, or not? And then the P is you prepare to be wrong. And that's hard in divorce because once you've let the genie out of the bottle, so to speak, and you said, I want a divorce, you can't take that back, right? But you can, there are some things that you can do. And this is what I work with people on, to say, okay, if I was wrong, what would happen? What would this look like if I make this decision 10 years down the road, am I going to be happy or sad? What would my life look like? So that's, the sixth step I think we're on or the fifth step, the preparing to be wrong. And then these are the two of the other steps that I added, which are so important. And that is, you need to make a plan. Your second P is a plan, because you can make whatever decision you want, but if you don't have a plan for how to execute it, it's worthless to you. You're not going to do anything. And the last step is to take action, because even with the best decision and a super plan, if you don't do anything about it, you haven't really made a decision. You're still stuck.
So I'm furiously writing some stuff down here, but there's an old adage that I've heard over the years. It says, failing to plan is a plan to fail. So I think that, encapsulates a lot of what you're saying. And I agree, if you don't have a plan, you don't know what you're working towards, and you don't know potentially what your spouse is working towards, it can really fall apart very quickly. I think also you spoke about, reality testing and objectivity and things like that. And, objectivity is a very difficult one when you, the subject, and that's part of what we were saying earlier about, does it make sense to have somebody who is experienced with this but is objective, because they can help you with reality testing. They're people that go in and they think, for example, if we go to court, the judge is going to see it my way because I was wrong. Judges are people. You know this better than I do. I've only been deposed in that. I haven't actually had to plead the cases. But judges are people. They have their biases. They wake up with good days and bad days. You're in the Chicagoland area. There's multiple judges dealing with family law. And you know what? They could all look at the case, and the same case, should I say, and render a little bit of a different decision. So, that reality testing, that objectivity, and building that plan that's incorporates the previous steps, I think are all huge pieces to somebody moving forward with this. It's
Absolutely.
great advice, and it's a logical step moving forward, which I love as well.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why people need someone like you, Hirsch, or a coach, and it's not just about the lawyer, although the lawyer is an important piece too, but you need someone who can reality test your assumptions in multiple areas. Like, are the financial assumptions that you're making really correct? Can you live on what you think you're going to be able to live on?
Right.
Have you made your budget? Have you done, the things that you need to do to say, okay, yes, this is realistic or not realistic? And the same thing is true with coaching or with your kids or with your, in every area of your life, with your house. So many people want to hold on to the house, and that may not be the wisest decision. And they haven't said, okay, realistically, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make it work? So that reality testing piece is key.
And I love that you brought up the house, because that is such a big item for people. And a lot of people will go, I want consistency. Okay, well, if there were bad things that happened in the marriage, they may have, been discussed in the house. Do you want that to consistently continue? There's a lot of pieces like that happen. And I'll throw this out, and then we got to start wrapping up. But just because you can afford the house doesn't make it the right decision either. Just something to think about as well. Karen, before we do, I just want to ask, you mentioned about fear as one of the big pieces holding people back. And for somebody who's never been through the process, or even if they have, it changes, it's different every marriage or every divorce. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of build an expectation to help alleviate some of those fears and help them understand the process that they're going to go through?
Absolutely. I mean, I work with people as a coach, primarily one-on-one, right? So we talk, and a big part of eliminating those fears comes from the very first step in the process, which is gathering information, and not just information, but knowledge, understanding, as you said, of how the system works. Because once a lot of the fear comes with just, it's the fear of the unknown, right? But once you can start to define, this is what it is, this is how it works, these are going to be the things that you have to deal with, you strip away some of that fear and make it less, hairy and scary, because you say, oh, this is, now I understand it. I can start to wrap my head around it and move forward through it. So, and part of alleviating the fear, Hirsch, is exactly what you said, which is making those small decisions and saying to yourself, oh, that wasn't so bad. Hey, I did that. I can do another one and another and another. And it builds on itself.
I have a friend who is a life coach, and he loves to say, and I've got to give him a lot of credit. I love the saying. He says, just think about it this way. You've survived and lived through 100% of your worst days. So you can make those decisions and you can move forward. Karen, before we wrap up, can you share one more time how people can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So the best place to find me is on my website at karencovey.com. You can email me, Karen@karencovey.com. My phone number is 312-236-1670. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube under Karen Covy.
Karen, thank you so much. This has been great. And I encourage everybody to reach out. There are a lot of decisions that you have to make. Sometimes you're not even aware of the rights, responsibilities, and decisions you have to make when you go through a divorce. So please do reach out and learn more from Karen. You can reach her on her website, or you can reach her through my website and reach out to me with questions for her. If you missed that, it's lifecycle.financial. That's one more time, lifecycle.financial. Karen, thank you again. CC Schatz, my producer, thank you for the magic behind and putting all the information out there and everything else that you do. And everybody have a wonderful week, and I will see you on my next show. Thank you.